I just want to talk about the next steps for the European development of the ELP. And there are really two focuses. First of all, there's the business of using the ELP as a support for the development of language policy, language learning and teaching across the whole of the school. And I've got two examples here. The first one is from our school for adult refugees in Dublin, with outposts around Ireland. The second is a new ECML project that I'm coordinating in the just starting 4-year medium-term program. And then the other thing I want to talk about is the challenge of plurilingualism, because that's also something where we have yet to make a great deal of progress in Europe. It's worth saying before I launch into the first of these examples that during the pilot projects, the emphasis was, I suppose necessarily, on developing the ELP as a pedagogical support, as some kind of embodiment of a set of teaching and learning procedures. They took many different forms, but they all converged on the kind of things that I've been going on and on and on about through the day. There wasn't a single pilot project that brought teachers of 2 or more different languages together. It was all to do with teachers in their classroom teaching, supporting the learning of a particular language. And given that it was Europe, once you took the UK and Ireland out of the equation, in the great majority of cases, it was English, which is why there are many people around Europe who think it's really called English language portfolio, not European language portfolio. One of the things that we need, therefore, to be doing is looking at opening that out. One of the experiences I shall be drawing on as I coordinate this project over the next 4 years is the experience that's focused on the milestone version of the European language portfolio. The context is our government funds intensive English language courses for adult immigrants who have refugee status. If they come in as program refugees, or if they come in as asylum seekers and achieve refugee status under the Geneva Convention, or are given humanitarian leave to remain, they have effectively citizenship rights, and our government, like other Western European governments, takes the view that they are obliged to provide them with opportunities for English language learning as part of the process of integration. The courses are developed by Integrate Ireland Language and Training, and here and on the accompanying handout you've got the URL, so you can go to our website if you want to follow up on any of the things I'm going to say. In 2007 we offered courses in Dublin and 11 other places around the country. The courses are intensive, which means that they run continuously. Apart from a 2-week break at Christmas and New Year, we have 4 terms in the year, 20 class hours a week, 15 learners per class. That is very much a private sector intensive for Ireland English language teaching model. Before we came into the picture, these courses were being supplied by the private schools, hence the 20 hours a week, that's 5 days a week, 4 hours a day. 15 learners per class is a private sector norm, and we inherited that structure. And most students attend for between 2 and 4 terms, so 6 to 12 months. The government has never specified a minimum or a maximum. On the whole, I don't know what happened there, but oh yes, that's all right, we're coming back. On the whole, we have a situation where learners leave when they feel they've got what they need to get a job or go into further education, training, or whatever. In 2007, we had 901 learners with 55% female, 45% male, and 93 nationalities. That doesn't quite mean 93 L1s, but nearly. The 10 most frequently represented nationalities, the ones you can see there. So there's a fair geographical and cultural ethnic spread. Most learners come with some kind of English, somewhere between the middle point in A1 and the lower point, the lower half of A2, but often with a very narrow range of proficiency within that. Few of them have absolutely no English and no literacy in their L1. A few have post-intermediate B1 plus English and professional qualifications. The government requires professionals to have an IELTS qualification in English before they practice, so we usually have a class that's preparing people for that. The approach to teaching and learning that we've always adopted, think back to the Hannah Thompson video, is that first of all it must be needs-based. And it's got to be needs-based in a very, very focused way, so that each course, by which I mean each term, is planned jointly by the teacher and learners on the basis of individual and group needs relative to integration. People say to me, how can you do that if they don't know any English? Well, one of our teachers came up with the following idea. She's got a collection of about 20 pictures of different situations that immigrants are likely to have to deal with. And they're on the wall, and the immigrants are each given 7 or 8 little self-adhesive stickers. Usually there's some degree of communication possible among them because they share languages or they have neighboring languages or whatever. There's a lot of gesturing goes on, and that leads into a process where they use the stickers to vote for the themes. And the themes are then ordered and they become the program. Textbooks are banned. There is absolutely no point in teaching a middle-aged Islamic woman who's coping with the shock of coming to live in Ireland how to ask for and understand directions to get around the London Underground, which is what you get, of course, in a lot of EFL textbooks. That's what they're about and what they're for. There's a lot of work with authentic texts, a lot of work, therefore, interacting with the kinds of documentation, application forms, regulations, and so on and so forth, that are everyday reality. And there has to be a very flexible classroom dynamic where things move from teacher to whole class, to teacher to groups, to individuals, to groups with one another, and so on. Inevitably, language learning is going to be driven by language use because English is necessarily the medium of teaching and necessarily the language in which learners mostly communicate with one another. There's a very, very strong emphasis on writing, not least because developing basic literacy skills is an important part of integration, but we also use writing as a support for speaking, and we use writing as a reflective tool. So those two things are carried over from what we were looking at this morning. And we emphasize the importance of learner autonomy because much experience has shown that if learners are responsible for their own activities and so on, they are more motivated, they learn in a more focused way, and they over time develop explicit learning skills. The milestone ELP was accredited in 2005, the 37th portfolio to be so accredited. There are versions in English, Dutch, Finnish, German, and Swedish because, as I think I mentioned earlier in the day, it was a product of an EU-funded consortium set up to work on this. As far as double ILT is concerned, it's an obligatory requirement for teachers. All teachers must use the ELP. We don't say how they must use it. and how they do use it varies depending upon the particular preferences of the teacher, but also depending on the different proficiency levels of the class of learners that the teacher is working with. In some cases, for example, with an academic class that's preparing for an IELTS exam, it makes sense to start with the passport, to look at the self-assessment grid, to use that to undertake a very broad brushstroke self-audit of language skills, then to make a more detailed audit using the checklists, and to build learning and teaching up from there. As I said earlier on, when you have learners who've got 0 English and 0 literacy, it's not sensible to put a rather complex document in front of them. What you do is to organize teaching so that gradually the worksheets that they are using build up in a dossier, and the ELP can take shape on top of that. What we've found as one of the advantages of doing this is that it helps to ensure continuity from term to term and from level to level. When learners come to the end of a term, some of them stay where they are in the same class, others move to another class. There will be other learners again who come in as being newly admitted to the school. It's very useful to the teacher to have continuity of evidence, at any rate, for those learners who are not new to the school. A few years ago, we had a new teacher. She just arrived. It was the first day of term. She'd been told she'd got to use this ELP. She'd had a quick look at it, but wasn't too sure. She knew that in her class of 15 learners, 7 were new to the school and 8 had used it before. So for the first morning, they worked in 2 separate groups. Those who were new were given a copy of the portfolio and were asked to work out what they might do with it. And those who weren't new had their portfolios, and they were told to prepare a presentation to explain to the other group how they had used it. And in that way, the teacher herself learned a lot and felt more confident on day 2. It certainly supports the development of learner autonomy and learner awareness and self-awareness. It relates all teaching and learning that goes on within this framework to the action-oriented approach and also the proficiency levels. And it provides a focus and a framework for teacher collaboration. This was one of the really important things that teachers themselves discovered. If they were all working with this ELP, they might be adopting different approaches for mediating it, introducing it, etc., etc. But they could save themselves an awful lot of time if they collaborated in the development of worksheets, activities, etc., etc., that either lead into or out of particular pages on the, of the ELP. We've made a lot of this material freely available on the website. You have to sign on, but you don't give a credit card number. And you can then get access to, I think, hundreds and hundreds of pages of stuff. What do the learners say about this approach? Well, one of the things that we require them to do within the general culture of self-assessment and reflective learning is to, at the end of each term, write a characterization of themselves in relation to the integration process and their current level of proficiency in English. So you have one learner writing, "I want to learn to help my children and also for my future. I always missed medical appointment because I couldn't understand the receptionist when he was speaking to me. But now my English is very good. And my experience now is speaking good English with people and saying anything in English. My experience now is to help my children do their homework, and I can write English in letters. Now when I send my girls to school, I can speak to their teacher. And when I go to the GP, I can speak and understand very well." Or this one, "I'm from Uzbekistan. I'm a student on an IILT English language course in Balbriggan." That's one of our outposts north of Dublin. "I started this course last year in October. The first time I came, it was very difficult but very interesting. Every day I've learnt new words, new rules, and many different things as well. The first time I didn't understand my teacher because she spoke very quickly, but now it's very helpful for me. My English improved every week and I'm feeling more confident. Before, I couldn't go to the GP, the shop, or many other places because I couldn't understand any words when Irish people asked me, and I couldn't speak properly as well. But now I can go to any place, and I'm not afraid that I don't understand. I'm very happy that I came to this course. Now I can read, write, speak, and even think in English. I hope that in the future I will speak more fluently, and I can choose and go to any college that I want. The new medium-term program of the European Centre for Modern Languages has a project on whole school ELP use. This is going to be focused not so much on what I've just been describing, which is getting all teachers in an institution that's teaching one language to focus on the ELP as a sort of binding element in everything that goes on in the school, but rather to bring together the teachers of different languages, and maybe no languages at all, in the use of the ELP. The aims that we have for this project are, first of all, to identify existing whole school projects in Council of Europe member states. I know of really only a handful around Europe. There may be more than I know of, but I'm sure not many more. There's a very impressive one in Strasbourg itself, in the Lycée Kléber, where the principal introduced the ELP on the basis of self-assessment, which was a bit of a culture shock in a French lycée, but which worked extraordinarily well, and where they're doing very, very interesting and innovative things. We also want to support new whole school projects. Out of that, we want to publish a series of case studies and also guidelines for the design, management, and evaluation of whole school ELP projects. In October this year, we shall have a workshop. The way these ECML projects work is that each ECML member state, in other words, each Council of Europe member state that signs up to the ECML, is entitled to send one person for free to participate in each project. And we'll use that workshop to establish a basic network. Over the period from 2008 to 2010, there'll be regular reports of the projects, and they'll be published on our website. We're then going to have a meeting of the network in 2010 that will enable us to finalize the case studies and guidelines. And right at the end of the project, there's to be a seminar for deciders.
You said various languages, but also non-language teachers. So you're trying to get, let's say, a science teacher or a different subject matter teacher involved as well, and what do you envision there, I guess?
What we are thinking of is, and it begins to move into this area of plurilingualism, where schools are using the ELP as a way of binding together all the language learning and teaching effort. Then the ELP may also be used not strictly within the framework of formal language learning and teaching, but within the larger ecology of the school to explore the plurilingual identity of students and the multilingual capacity that the school itself has. Because the ELP is intended not just as a pedagogical support, though that's what I've been strongly emphasizing today. It's intended as a way of auditing one's proficiency in any languages other than the mother tongue. And that, of course, includes languages that one has learnt and uses outside the educational framework altogether. Increasingly in European countries with mobile populations and so on, there are large numbers of pupils and students who have proficiency, not necessarily L1 proficiency, L2 proficiency, that isn't in any way acknowledged within the school system. If we can begin to use the ELP in the way that I've described, to develop whole school policy towards language teaching and learning and make it the focus for all the language learning that kids do at school, I think it should then be possible to go beyond that and take account of languages not learnt within the school system, but very present in the heads of pupils and students. That's what I've got in mind.
There happens to be a very, very strong English language learner population within that school. The majority of students in the school do not have English as a first language. And of course there's a pretty healthy languages department. What will be interesting, and I think that there was also a question about this, is for those students who would not identify themselves as somebody who learns English as a second language and who are not registered in a language program implementing the ELP.
I just want to clarify what you said. So the ELP is not intended for use for a first language, whether that first language is language of instruction at school or not. Am I correct?
The Common European Framework of Reference is explicitly focused on second languages.
Yeah.
The ELP is intended to be a means of supporting the learning of languages other than the mother tongue and recording experience of using languages other than the mother tongue. But willy-nilly it has been used in many different European contexts as a way of validating languages that pupils and students bring to school, whether L2 or L1, that don't otherwise get acknowledged within the educational system. One of the issues that we've had in validating ELPs has had to do with checklists and levels. We have, for example, had a number of ELPs focused on primary age learners that have checklists that go from A1 to C2. Now that shows a poor understanding of the scheme, but when one challenges it, the kind of reply one gets is, yes, but you see, we're using this also to validate the mother tongues of migrant pupils, and because they're native speakers, they must be C2. Well, that doesn't follow at all, of course, and is a misunderstanding. But it is certainly the case that the ELP has been a great boost for people who want to find a way of acknowledging language other than language that's taught in school. It leaves us with this challenge of plurilingualism. Plurilingualism, as you probably know, the Council of Europe attaches as a characteristic of individuals, multilingualism as a characteristic of societies. For example, Switzerland is a multilingual society. There are many monolingual speakers in Switzerland. The UK is, on the whole, thinks of itself as a monolingual society, but there are many plurilingual members of that society. And this is what the framework says about what it calls the plurilingual approach, emphasizes the fact that as an individual person's experience of language in its cultural context expands from the language of the home to that of society at large, and then to the languages of other peoples, whether learnt at school or college or by direct experience. He or she does not keep these languages, are you still awake? He or she does not keep these languages in strictly separated mental compartments, but rather builds up a communicative competence to which all knowledge and experience of language contributes, and in which languages interrelate and interact. Now, there's a contradiction in there with the scales and levels, because the scales and levels were developed through this empirical project that focused exclusively on second foreign language learning. Whereas it tells us here, and it's perfectly clear in any case intuitively, that each individual's plurilingual identity is going to be rooted in the language of the home. That's where it's going to start, and you can't in any case, if you're talking about a composite linguistic identity, exclude the L1. So from the very beginning, there's been a contradiction at the heart of the ELP concept. You see where I'm coming from on that? Now, it's complicated by the fact that the descriptors for reading and writing, especially when adapted for younger learners, may very well also apply to the learning of L1 literacy. I mean, kids who are given a primary portfolio with descriptors focused on reading and writing don't see any problem in identifying what they're learning to do by way of reading and writing on the basis of those descriptors. And as I say, the water is also muddied by the fact that the ELP has been a useful way of allowing people with languages other than those dealt with in the educational system to get some sense of validation. But we've had that problem really from the beginning. That gives us some challenges to respond to. First of all, how are we going to develop and implement a plurilingual curriculum? Well, Council of Europe has just begun work on a set of guidelines for ministries and language educators. How do we bring instructed and naturalistic plurilingualism into fruitful contact with one another? Well, the ELP is intended to include naturalistic L2 learning. However, as I've just said, our plurilingual capacity is rooted in our L1, whereas the framework and the portfolio are explicitly L2 focused. And what that means, and it's meant it really from the beginning, is we have to find a way of expanding the ELP concept to accommodate L1. And with that sort of in mind, the Council of Europe a couple of years ago launched a new project on languages of education. You can get to that. There's already a lot of material available online. If you go to the Language Policy Division website, www.coe.int/lang, and then select the section Languages of School Education. One of the original motivations for launching this project was the concern in member states about immigrant students at second level, so junior and especially senior secondary school, who didn't have sufficient skills in the language of the host community to access education properly. That's a very, very big problem throughout Western Europe. And it was hoped that this Languages of School Education project would address that. It is beginning to do so, but interestingly, as soon as the project was announced, it brought together from a large number of member states people who are interested in language across the curriculum. So very much an L1 rather than an L2 language of education focus. But we're due to have a meeting in October this year, which I hope will kickstart the process of bringing the whole ELP thing into interaction with the languages of education, or languages of school education, as they're now calling it, project, because the languages of school education is already working on some descriptive framework which it's hoped to set beside the Common European Framework, and which it's hoped will complement it with an eye on languages of school education. So it's a matter of expanding the portfolio concept to bring in L1, and to hope that between the Common European Framework and whatever descriptive framework comes out of that project, can do that in a reasonably effective way. Those are the two things that are particularly bothering us at the moment in Europe. Money.